But the show must go on, and here we are for day 2 of Convergence and Unbound. I just want to thank, of course, our partners, such as the IMDA that made this possible, and I also want to thank all of our speakers. We have an amazing group of experts for you today, and of course, I want to thank all of you for coming to my stage that I very humbly have been able to host for 2 years in a row. It's actually pretty crazy to be able to do this year in, year out. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jose. I am the Americas Director for Unbound. I lead all of our efforts in North, Central, and South America. We host Unbound Miami. It's in its 2nd year, and that will happen on October 31st. If any of you guys would like to come, or if you're interested in partnership opportunities, speaking opportunities, or if you just want to ask me about how the weather is going to be like in October, please let me know. I'll be happy to let you know about all of those great things. Please do not forget, we are taking questions through the Unbound app, and you can do that anonymously. So if you want to ask whatever it is that you want to, feel free. We have a very open-ended policy here at Unbound. So clearly you're not here to listen to me, so please, I want to introduce our first panel, which will be moderated by my friend Roger over here. So please give him a round of applause, and yeah, enjoy the show.
Good morning, guys. Thank you for coming. I'm sorry we're not serving coffee in this room. We're going to talk about optimism and innovation. As you know, the digital world is divided between 2 giants. Google on one hand, who want you and your dog to have a web page, but the web page got to be fast, the content got to be unique and relevant. So this is putting a lot of pressure on my dog, and she's losing her hair. On the other hand, you have Facebook, who want nobody to have a web page, but they want all the content on their platform. So most of us were somewhere in between. And here to hopefully bring us optimism, and I'm not optimistic about that myself, are these great guys who are on the cutting edge of technology, advertising management, who work with corporate to understand their investment in digital and in media. So Dominic, why don't you tell me a little bit more about your company and yourself?
So yeah, Dominic Powers of CtrlShift. I'm the CEO. We're a Singapore-founded 7-year-old company that provides a media management optimization technology that sits above the fragmented ad tech ecosystem to basically give control back to advertisers and create workflows that can make agencies more efficient, delivering obviously better outcomes for everybody, whether they're playing in Facebook, Google, or some of the other open exchanges and platforms.
Yeah, thank you. Edward, you're all the way from London, from Warc. Please tell us.
Hi, my name is Ed Pank, and I'm the Managing Director of Warc in Asia Pacific, based here in Singapore. And I opened the office about 7 years ago in Singapore. And basically what we do, we provide, through a marketing intelligence online subscription service, access to best practice contents, case studies, trends, data on how to do more effective advertising. So it's success stories from around the world, and we help agencies, anybody involved in the marketing ecosystem, to do better advertising. In terms of brands, about 30 to 40% of our clients are now brands because they're looking to take control of the complexity that exists in the marketing ecosystem now. So we help them navigate that complexity.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Justin Choo, CEO of Knorex. Our company is founded 8 years ago. So what we provide is a platform, online advertising platform for media agencies and advertisers, where we actually provide them platform to improve and grow their business itself. At the same time, we also provide them with managed services to help companies who don't have the kind of in-house expertise, or otherwise they would actually like to outsource this out. Thank you.
Vincent?
Hi everybody, good morning. I'm Vincent Martin, the CEO of iVideoSmart. So we are also a young company because we are 2 years old. We are media tech and ad tech companies, so it means that we help the publishers to master videos and to monetize it. And how do we master videos? We help them to increase usage with data analysis and artificial intelligence, machine learning and stuff like that to provide the right video to the right user at the right moment in the right context. And then we use all those data to provide also non-intrusive advertising to them.
Thank you. Before we get deep dive into this area, you can post your question on Slido, and we will try to get to it in the course of our discussion. Now, I want to open up discussion talking about what we all care about, customer. When we talk to customer, what's on their mind? Content, channel, return on investment. What's driving the corporate buyer of our technology, our services? What's driving them, and what are they afraid of?
So ultimately they're looking for outcomes, business outcomes. They're looking to sell product, they're looking to engage consumers in some shape or form. And obviously there are many, many channels that they can do that through, whether it's Google, whether it's Facebook, whether it's the other exchanges. I think some of the biggest concerns that they obviously have beyond just brand safety and making sure the ad is placed in the right place at the right time, it's about how they can actually manage the complexity and also manage the opaqueness of the industry. And I think if we're honest, if we look at how our industry has grown over the past 10 years, really from when programmatic was born, we've arrived at a place where if an agency or a brand puts $1 into the advertising ecosystem, a publisher at best ends up with 30-40% of that money. And so there's this opaqueness, which means this money is disappearing and being sliced at various points in the ecosystem. And so brands are rightly upset about this. And so they're looking now, if you read the press, you can see this from P&G, from Unilever, British Telecom, they're starting to look to take back control. They really want to understand what's going on, but the challenge is they've now got to overcome the complexity of it. They've got to try and manage this system that their agency partners have managed for them for many years, and to then have the visibility that they need to understand, are we being as successful as we could be and should be?
I completely agree. The clients that we have, they're obsessed, and rightly so, about growing their brands and growing their businesses. And so they want to maximize their advertising spend. And they're faced with a huge amount of choice, whether it's traditional media, and let's face it, there's still a play for traditional media. I know we're at a tech conference, and I shouldn't really say that, but fundamentally it's about optimizing your spend. So marketers are looking at how to drive their brands, how to connect with their audiences in a really engaging way. And I say I don't use the word brand lightly. I think it's fundamentally important. And I know this is a tech conference with a lot of startups, and brand may not necessarily be front of mind, but it's really important to establish and found your brand on some sound principles and values that can connect with your target audience. And it's about really understanding your target audience that will enable you to do so. So yes, I completely agree, it's about maximizing advertising spend, but also how to create, nurture, and develop a brand in this age of digital and fragmentation in a way that's actually going to resonate with consumers. And that's in an age of content saturation where we're bombarded with messages, there's too much content, and quite frankly, consumers don't really care about brands so much. How do you connect? How do you resonate? How do you get to stand out?
I think that's right, because people forget that even though we are at a tech conference, people forget marketing advertising is about primal emotion. Harley-Davidson still had this huge motorcycle rally because that is the most powerful way to connect. Technology is one tool, so as a startup, we got to think just beyond technology. Psychology, social ritual, and I think I'm going to jump over to Justin, where video. Talk about how corporate approach video as a content versus, I know this is not a channel choice, but how do you connect emotion with the brand message and the brand needs?
So first you need to, in fact, to understand what is within the video. And that's something that is usually lacking because most of the metadata that you can get around the videos are what is described by the people. So that's why we have, typically we have developed some artificial intelligence tools to understand what is within a video, which allows us to create what we call a content graph. So saying, what is the level of violence, what is the level of nudity, a lot of different stuff. And based on that, we can connect the right brand with the right type of content. Why? Because depending on the region, depending on the brand, the way the people will perceive a specific nudity, for example, can be very bad in Asia, but on the contrary, in the United States or Western Europe, it's okay. And then the brands can be associated. And that's how, in fact, you can create a link to get a brand well connected to the right content. But at the same time, you need also to provide a full transparency for the brand to know exactly with which content, at which time it has been associated, and on which property. So it's all that, also that transparency that today is really lacking in the advertising world. That is clearly something that we want to change, and I believe that if we go that way, the whole ecosystem will benefit with less scares, in a way.
So, Justin, your Knorex provide a intermediary between company and agency. How do you see what we've been talking about? How does agency survive in this situation where the obscurity of the spending and the outcome has to be managed through agency? How do they see the channel, the content, and their brand customer?
So I think first of all, for Knorex itself, our whole tagline is about precision performance marketing. So right message, right time, and the right place. And what we focus on is on performance. Of course, as what has been shared, I think performance is one aspect. You can't just keep driving performance and not caring about how people perceive. So when we work with our agency partners, typically, we try to understand what they want to achieve for their customers. So starting with that, and then we try to propose as well what we can do in terms of our tools and our tech for them. So that's how usually we go about.
A lot of digital startup in the marketing tech, they're actually acting as a role of an agency for a corporate client. Now, having these guys here, I gotta ask, what is the role of agency going forward? Are they a tech management consultancy? Are they content strategists? Are they a performance evaluator? What do you see the corporation need from an agency going forward in this kind of digital fragmentation?
Personally, I think the role of the agency is to help the client navigate the complexity, but also to understand their customer, to really dig deep and find insights around their customer. When it comes to video, what are the psychological motivations of their customer, and how can a brand align themselves with those psychological motivations? So there's a fantastic case study that did really well in effectiveness awards. It was for SK2 in China. And what they wanted to do was to really understand women in China, and so they did this interrogation, this sort of ethnographic study of this term Shengnu women, discarded women, which is a label that was given to Chinese women in China that chosen not to follow the pressure of their parents and get married at an early age, but actually forge their own careers. And they created a 4-minute documentary. So this is long-form video of an understanding of who these women were, and it's incredibly powerful. And coming from they had quite a precarious position in China. They were accused by the Chinese government of using illegal ingredients, and they had a bit of a PR crisis many years ago. And so actually they came back and they almost doubled their sales as a result of this powerful campaign of Change Destiny. So I think it's agencies can really help their clients understand the deep emotional insights of their customers, and then turn that into ideas. And at the end of the day, it's ideas that play out. They are the things that glue campaigns together. Yes, we're talking about ad tech predominantly today, but actually it's an integrated piece around a unifying idea. And I think that is the point that agencies can help their clients and stand out.
If I could perhaps add to that, maybe just a quick show of hands. Anybody from a large network agency?
A large network agency.
Excellent, we have a safe room. So I think one of the biggest problems we face in the industry today has actually been self-created by the network agencies and their silos. And so the complexity that we see in the ad tech system is something that's been fired by the agencies who say it's far too complex, far too difficult to manage it, Mr. or Mrs. Brand, let me manage it for you. And so what that's done has created this layer of transparency, because the agencies want to make money and they do what they do. They arbitrage media, they're taking their cut on the back end, and they've created this issue. And so I think, to echo your point, really they've done this by putting technology stacks in place that aren't really technology stacks. They've created things with smoke and mirrors that have allowed them to perpetuate this complexity. And I think where the agencies need to go is back to where they started, which is focusing on the strategy, the insights, the creative, the what, the why, the who. Don't focus on the how. There are plenty of technology players out there that can do things, to be honest, far more efficiently than the agencies can. And don't get me wrong, we want to work with agencies, we also want to empower them, but they are a very big part of the problem that exists in the industry, not just for startups, not just for developed organizations, but for really everybody that wants to see media managed and used efficiently.
Yeah, and let's face it, I think there's quite a lot of bad programmatic messaging out there.
Yep.
Programmatic ad tech enables efficiency, but I think a lot of the messaging has gone wrong. It's about last product seen. So I was in the UK last week. I booked a flight to Heathrow. I hired a car. I paid for it online. I then went to the UK, hired my car. I'm still getting in my Facebook feed offers from the same car rental company to hire a car, and it pisses me off. It's kind of gone wrong. It's this last product seen, and they haven't actually got the data right. They haven't actually understood who I am. They keep bombarding me with this kind of message. But as a consumer, I feel kind of quite harassed. Whereas if they really understood me and what it's about, and the sort of seamless experience of arriving in an airport and all the rest of it, and offered me value, and at the end of the day, I think that's incumbent on advertisers to offer value to consumers, either through utility or through entertainment. You can split it into two kind of buckets. Then if you don't do that, then I think you're simply failing, and just keeping bombarding messaging at consumers in a last mile kind of way, driving conversion, I think is wrong, quite frankly.
So, Justin, Edward mentioned this question. I always get the best cheap airline ticket after I come back from my vacation. Right? Where were you guys a week ago? So how do you measure this kind of inefficiency in a campaign for a client on your platform? How does Knorex tell the client how much of their ad dollars wasted, or what part of the ad campaign they need to double down? What's the thinking behind your intelligence for the client?
So typically how we start working with our customers, naturally we will try to find out from them how to actually get to where they are in the first place. So by understanding what they were doing, and then how they have achieved the kind of so-called performance or results. And it's actually quite varied. So you will have customers who know exactly how they got there, and then you have customers who are just sort of going the flow, and they just happens to be there. But importantly is that we try to get them to understand through one of the method right now, which is attribution. Getting them to actually figure out which are some of the vendors that they work with and how it actually delivers for them towards their performance. So that's one. The second one is actually through tracking itself. So the tracking itself, of course, it goes both ways. In this particular case for the customers, it's very important because we have worked with customers, for example, that was trying very, very hard to change vendors and then to drive results. And typically it doesn't work out. And when we went in, we tried to understand what happened. And what we found out was that, first of all, the website itself is actually so slow that you can't even click buy now. And they were actually having a problem actually loading it on different countries, for example, where they actually try to show the ads. So the ads doesn't even come up in the first place, or otherwise is the button doesn't even come up for people to actually click buy now. So that's a huge problem by itself, and the customers was actually not aware because from where they were based, it didn't have this problem in the first place. So through some of this tracking itself, it helps to elucidate to them these kind of issues as well. So.
No, thanks. Justin, I want to reinforce what we've been talking about. Edward, sorry. Don't mean to familiar. Talk about the power of a campaign being the idea. And we also talk about the relevancy of the delivery. Now, video is a very particularly well constructed, and you can change the content on the fly. So how do you think about getting the powerful idea in front of the audience at an appropriate time? I mean, this has got to be a huge challenge.
So that's true that you cannot change the content on the fly. Well, soon we will be able to do it because we can always do digital product placement. We already do it, but it's not real time. Then we can integrate, typically if you have a bathroom scene, we can integrate any kind of brand of shampoo, and the brand of shampoo will depend on the country. Typically, that's something that is already possible. So that's true that we cannot do that. But on a video player, it's no more the TV. Now, most of the people watch videos mainly on connected devices. So it means that we can put layers on top of the video. And putting a layer on top of the video means that we can put less intrusive ads, which can engage a little bit more with the user because it is less intrusive, which is perhaps a little bit strange at first, but when users are not bothered by a full set of advertisement everywhere, they are more keen to engage with the few spots they have. And then you can put hotspots on a video. You can do a lot of stuff, in fact, with the video. And because the video has the main advantage to engage more users, it's more emotional, usually, and let's face it, images are moving. And our eye is attracted by moving images. So that's how we do that. But at the end of the day, everything that has been said, everything that is done and so on, can be done only if we have proper data. It means if we have a proper transparency, whatever the way a buyer buy advertisement, it can be direct, it can be programmatic, it could be private, public, whatever. We need to, I think that today we have a large ground for innovation in that field because we see appearing new technologies that can solve that. I will name some stuff like blockchain, but because it's a kind of buzzword, but it can be useful because it's decentralized. If we consider that we don't have, we won't be in a full duopoly with only two companies controlling the whole advertising ecosystem. But if we consider that other players can still survive, then having a decentralized way to collect and to track information can be very useful. And in that case, you have technologies like blockchain that can be used.
Okay, thank you. Now, I want to shift gear and talk about change in consumer behavior online and how that affects our strategy to help the client speak to them. Like, a recent report has just shown that American teenagers are really abandoning Facebook for the third time in 5 years. How that, and these are the things we're looking at. People leaving platform, new platform with anonymous capacity. It seems like it's not just the technology is more fragmented, but the consumer behavior is also more erratic. How do we become specialists, or do we simply produce ads that are immutable and we just push through every channel, or do we create one micro content for one channel and then we got to do something else for something completely different? How do you guys think about the fragmentation of behavior and the fragmentation of channels?
I think it's incumbent on brands and advertisers to start having a conversation with their customers in a very human kind of way. At the moment, through automation and through ad tech, it's about pushing messages out in a very efficient manner. But what that does is it just creates this sort of torrent of advertising that's pushed out to people online. I was talking to my son was on my laptop just last week, and he said, "Dad, what are all these ads doing on here? You haven't got any ad blocking software on here. I mean, what are you doing?" And this is a 10-year-old. This is my 10-year-old son who's lambasting me for not actually having ad blocking software. So the point is, I think consumers are really tired of this type of messaging. Instead, brands have to start to engage and have a conversation and reach out. And I think there's a real role for content marketing in this, building a relationship. So if you're a diaper brand, someone might be searching to look up pregnancy online, and that could be the signal of a brand starting to have a relationship with someone, not pushing them products and not saying, okay, I've got 4 years of nappies that I can push out of you, but start to understand that person. What are their wants and needs? What are their fears? What information are they looking for? And then start to nurture that as a relationship. And I think that's the way that brands should start to reach out to their customers.
But then I think they also have to understand the ecosystem they're working in, and so to allow that fragmentation that you talk about to work for them. What's typically happened now is because Facebook and Google have just been so easy, and you can push one thing to everybody and it does the targeting for yourself, they become lazy. And if you look now that millennials are moving away from Facebook, you have to start exploring those different channels of where the consumers are going to be, and also understanding why they're there. This goes to the content, it goes to the affinity with what they're looking at. And if you're starting to look at programmatic as a real driver of what you're trying to achieve as a brand, you have to start to understand the audience. You have to start to build strategies that are focused on smaller groups of individuals, built around what's important to them, build the creative, build the messaging around that. It takes time, it takes energy, but that's how you're going to get the results. And that's really where, even if you're a startup, you have to start to build that brand before you start to look at the performance. Because if you just focus on performance and just push for the lowest CPM, the lowest CPA with whatever message, self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. You're never going to succeed. So think about the audience, use what data is available, understand what they have affinity with, and then start to build your strategies for those individuals.
It's interesting, there was an article just out about how startup addicted to paid customer acquisition will eventually die because that's not sustainable. And I think it speaks to how they don't have a deep connection with the user, and they have a transactional, so when something cheaper comes along, you're replaced. So can we measure loyalty, or can we cement loyalty through storytelling?
In fact, it's a matter of platform, because when we are talking about all that, you were mentioning Google, Facebook, because it is a duopoly. Why? They can do that because they have the scale. And what we observe today in the market, at least for everything around newspaper and so on, is more and more alliances that are built between publishers in order to share data. And the ultimate goal is to provide to a brand, in a way, some aggregated information across properties. And the only people today who are really able to do that are Google and Facebook. Locally, you can have that. You have such an alliance in Singapore between SPH and MediaCorp. You have such an alliance in Thailand. Indonesia, I'm thinking about that kind of alliance. In the US, it has been announced last week. Well, the publishers are starting to understand that they need to share their data if they want to compete against Facebook and Google, because they have no choice. If we want to track the behavior of a user because it's very fragmented, we need to be able to track it on a lot of different platforms. And today only 2 people are able to do it. So I think that it is the answer to that evolution.
Now, this is specifically for you. A lot of audience asking about performance and transparency in programmatic. So let's talk about, will a transparent pricing structure, performance tracking, make the industry better? I mean, corporation and customer wants it, but what does that do to a business when your pricing structure, all your outcome is completely transparent? So, and you're tracking this for agency and corporations, so you're the best one to answer this one.
Sorry. So with regards to the transparency itself, I think there was a lot of talk, especially these couple of years. I think we have to kind of like step back a bit as well and really think about it, in a rational and reasonable way again. First of all, for example, let's say right now when we actually buy a cup of Starbucks coffee, do we actually ask Starbucks to be transparent about every single breakdown of their items? The coffee beans, the milk.
Coffee beans 2% off a cup of Starbucks.
But exactly how much they pay for the coffee beans to the farmer, how much they pay for logistics, how much they pay for milk, and so on and so forth. So I think it comes back to this whole thinking about, again, from a marketer point of view, what do you want to achieve? What do you want to connect with your customer itself? And then, sort of working that and then towards that goal. And when it comes to transparency, we talk about performance. So when we talk about performance itself, typically, we got 2 kinds of talk that we can have with our customers. First, we ask them, what kind of ROI do you want? If you want that ROI, as long as I can't promise you that I do not do fraudulent stuff to achieve it, are you fine with that, not knowing anything that I do in between to get you that? Which is no difference than if I actually give you, if you pay for a price, I give you a product itself, and as long as I can promise you that the product itself is safe, and you have the product itself, right? Then there's the other aspects where, for example, there are large customers, for example, that we work with. They need to know, so-called throughout the whole supply chain, how things are all accountable for, where they are coming from, and so on and so forth. And I think that there is this need to find a balance, because if we go all into like just worrying about all the transparencies, things like viewability, whether the ads, for example, is seen. In the case of ROI, I must be able to deliver the ads in order to generate the ROI. So on that basis itself, all these things are in the sense given, right? So how do we actually make sure that that message itself is actually conveyed, and customers itself is actually thinking in a practical and reasonable way about it as well. I think that's very important.
So I might challenge that a little bit. And I've been in this industry in Asia for 20 years, and I think one of the biggest problems why we're at the place we are, where brands are asking for this transparency, is when this industry was born, it was all about being able to show ROI. And so what's happened is over the years, the industry has shied away from it because their kimono's been completely opened. And so the agencies have tried to shield some of that and have tried to make more money on the back end, which has again created this whirlpool of discontent. And so really to go against what you're saying, yes, we don't know how much a Starbucks really costs, but the fact of the matter is we can show and we can still build great relationships by being transparent about how media is bought. The brands don't have an issue if the money that's disappearing is being spent on valuable data, on valuable brand safety. What they have the issue about, and I'll say it as there's no agencies here, is the agencies taking 15, 20, 30% for doing nothing. And I'll give you an example that came to us in Thailand at the beginning of this year. We had a large network media agency come to our team and say, we want you to execute our programmatic campaign for our client. I said, sure, absolutely, we'll do it on our platform, we'll give you all the reports you need, real time. They went brilliant. So this money, it was about $300,000 US, has to include your fee, and we're really transparent. They said, oh, by the way, we want our 25% commission as well. But 25% for what? So that is now why, because the agencies have really been exposed and the brands understand that happens, that's what they want to see. They're not necessarily interested in the pieces that are being spent on parts of the ad tech ecosystem that deliver value. It's the pieces that don't. And so where we're stepping in is providing a layer that allows them to see and compare, whether it's Google, Facebook, Choo, Mogul, whatever programmatic buying system that will be, to show how they're performing against each other. And I think that's what the brands want to see. They want to know, if I've been recommended by my agency just to use this DSP, whether it's Trade Desk or MediaMath, how does it actually perform against another? Is that same audience being able to be bought at the same amount of money? Well, if it's not, then why don't we start optimizing in the place where we can get the best result? And that's the type of transparency they want. It's not about the cup of coffee and what goes into making it, because they're not asking how much the technologies cost to build, but they want to know where their advertising dollars are being spent, and that's the issue.
So I think one thing that I'm really excited about the industry as well, in a sense, is that we are living in an exciting time, in a sense. Throughout the whole past decades itself, in terms of media advertising itself, like you say, there hasn't been this kind of publicized or in this case the whole understanding of how advertising media are actually being accounted for. When I first joined the industry itself, I was pretty surprised by a lot of the so-called metrics that was being measured. Many of it are very intangible, actually. So I think what we are trying to do right now, over this period of time, I think people are sort of trying to figure out things, with all these different channels, different formats, and how do we measure them? What are meaningful metrics that will make sense? And then how do I actually sort of track some of this itself, which are very important, and asking those questions to the right people.
Okay. I'm going to change another ship. So there's a 3-ship car here we have here. With all the experience here, I really want to ask an interesting question. A question that's of great interest to me. Was in today's content saturation, how does brand or agency take creative leap and mitigate risk of something going horribly wrong? How do we take creative risk when there's so much content that we take risk to stand out, but we stand out not in a way that endangers the brand?
You can validate your decisions and your creative development process by looking at best practice, which is, shout out to my company, Warc. That's kind of what we do. Provide case studies in terms of what's working, so that brands can tap into that. And I think there's testing. I mean, you can test campaigns very effectively through digital, through markets, through micro markets. I'll give you an example, which Coke did a campaign, the Share a Coke campaign. So fantastic personalization campaign where they were able to customize cans of Coke with people's names. It was a few years ago. It was actually tested in Australia first. as a market, as a kind of isolated market, and it was incredibly effective, and then they rolled it out around the world. So it's about, in terms of clients and their budgets, I think it's about assigning a certain amount of that budget to be able to kind of experiment and test and learn, and having that culture of permission to fail. It's about saying, yeah, okay, this didn't work, we assigned a certain amount of money towards it, but we can learn from it and we can build on those kind of outcomes, and we can develop more effective advertising as a result. So it's about having an element of the budget that is there for testing, which people can experiment and learn, and then take those learnings forward, and having that culture of it's okay to fail, but as long as you learn from those kind of failures.
But a lot of startups don't have that kind of resource. I remember there was a dating app in China where they had a viral campaign where this attractive female actress was asking to live in different places in China to order to see around the country, and the company got banned by the government overnight because they were taking very creative risks, but they didn't have the resource to test that. Or maybe it's an issue of the mindset. So most of the things we think about today, it's about getting people's attention, and only brand with patience and with something to protect have the resource or budget to really mitigate the risk by testing. I think, and I think this is probably a really dangerous mindset in startup, where move fast and break things, and a lot of times you end up breaking yourself. So this is the kind of things I see all the time with startup, with younger company who do very, very far out PR stint to get attention in order to benefit, and that most of the time doesn't end well. And I think that may happen more and more in a digital environment where testing is cheap, but wisdom not to do something is very expensive.
So I think what you have to do is understand as a startup the legal boundaries within which you have to work. And I think if I remember the brand you were talking about in China, what they did wasn't actually illegal, it just wasn't liked. Well, that's working in China. And there is an old saying, no publicity is bad publicity. So if you do something that gains attention, then you're obviously going to gain attention for your brand. So I think it goes back to still testing, still being brave, making sure you give yourself the ability to just think slightly laterally and say, okay, maybe this is going to work for this type of audience and it's going to get their attention. But you've got to test. I mean, our whole industry is built on testing and learning, so that you can optimize. And you're in a digital world. And again, as I said earlier, we've set ourselves up as an industry where you can do that. And so we now just have to make sure that incumbents and new organizations that are growing and starting that want to test it come with that same mindset. Have budgets, but test and learn, test and learn. Don't expect miracles from day one. It's not going to happen.
But it's also, you said that it's expensive and only big brands can afford that kind of testing. Yes, if you do it using human. But more and more you have new technologies arriving, and you have new startups working on that, specifically using machine learning, artificial intelligence. I know that it is buzzwords, but it can be useful sometimes. And they can start doing that kind of testing automatically, and you have a lot less human, so it's a lot less expensive, and then you can do it. And any brand can access it.
Thank you. This will not be a startup event unless there's one Hyperledger Bitcoin question. Very quickly, do you guys see Hyperledger being a component in the programmatic ad going forward? Or we simply live too fast for a mutable record?
Yes, and I think it's not going to be something that's led by the programmatic industry itself. I think it's going to be led on the other side by an organization that's created that represents the consumer, and that's where it's going to take play from.
So, Justin, talk about our discussion of transparency over breakfast and how that ties in with the blockchain.
No, I think that all those new regulations and stuff like that are coming up are a very big chance for new players to enter the industry and to disrupt the industry. I will answer very shortly like that.
I think for example, the most recent case with the GDPR, I thought it was a good time to sort of get people to pause and think for a moment and rethink about, what is important and, what are some of the things that we need to actually really focus on and pay more attention to that itself. So in our respect, in terms of blockchain, I think it's a very interesting piece of technology. We are monitoring it. But so far we are still actually learning more about it itself to see how it can actually be adopted to solve or achieve more transparency as well.
More transparency, and that will help you go.
Yeah, I wouldn't pretend to be a blockchain expert, but there's a lot of talk in the industry about blockchain being the panacea for programmatic and providing that kind of trail of accountability. But yeah, someone's got to do it. There's got to be a currency behind it. I understand the speed is an issue in terms of creating each block. It takes more time than actually, the programmatic process in itself, so that is an issue. But yeah, that could be a way of actually providing that full kind of transparency in terms of what's going on and who's getting the money where. So yeah, time will tell, I guess.
Time will tell. Time will tell, and we are at the end of our allotted time, but I have these great guys here. I want just one thing. Give me one thing that we look forward to the future of our industry that give you optimism. Technology, practice, legislation. One thing that give me optimism about the future. Else I'm going to kill myself right now.
Defragmentation and the provision of choice to brands where they want to advertise, no longer a duopoly.
I think voice. I think voice is a really interesting area. At Warc, we've just published the fact that the 1 in 5 ad spend dollars this year is going to be spent on search. And there's predictions that actually most search in the years to come is going to be done through voice. And that has all sorts of implications for brands and businesses. What does your brand actually sound like? What is your brand voice? What are the characteristics of your brand in an audible way? And we all know the issues around automation and the fact that we feel kind of creeped out when we're sort of stalked online and this last mile, last product seen kind of advertising happens when you try and book a rental car. But voice, it's about not creeping out the consumer, being engaging, and there's a real element to provide that level of humanity. But also there are all sorts of implications, particularly with things like Amazon's Alexa. When you want to buy a packet of batteries, you say, Alexa, I'd like to buy a packet of batteries, and they'll either choose you the Amazon-owned label, or you might actually have to pay to be able to be at the front of the queue in terms of what's offered to the consumer. So there's all sorts of issues around that, but I think voice is a really exciting area for the industry.
Thank you, Warc.
So, as with things that move in cycle right now, I think we are in a sort of chaotic time to some extent, but it's also very, I'm also very hopeful that, people are, a lot of marketeers and customers that we have actually worked with are beginning to actually put a lot of effort into learning, into actually going back to the basic and asking, the important question. What do I want to do for my customers? I think that's the most important thing, and we are pretty happy that, we are seeing that our customers and partners are all going in that direction. So
I would say alliances and cooperation, because it is something that we see very new in that industry, with a lot of players working together to grow the cake globally instead of fighting against each other and shrink the cake. So I think that it's a very positive trend that we see today, to share all those data, to work together to build a better advertising world in a way.
Thank you. I'm not sure I'm any more optimistic, but I'm very happy to spend this morning with you guys, especially with these 4 amazing gentlemen. Please join me in thanking them for their time and their knowledge sharing.
Roger, thank you so much. Thank you guys.